Before we start this video, do like and subscribe to our channel and not miss on any updates.
Hi my dear friends, I welcome you all to the discussion on this wonderful topic called GST, that is Goods and Services Tax. As you all are aware, GST is worth for about 50 marks for new syllabus, but let me tell you, the moment you cross this stage of intermediate and move to CA final, we have a separate paper of 100 marks for indirect taxation. So there is a good element of importance for this topic called GST, and definitely going forward it will be of very much practical use. When I talk about GST, the big thing is that a lot of students are perceiving that GST full form is only goods and service tax. But let me tell you, it is not just goods and service tax, it is actually called as goods and services tax. That's a fundamental clarity what we should have, that it is not goods and service tax, it is goods and services tax. Correct? Now, I have a question. Friends, prior to GST law, what were the taxes which were there? Now, when GST has come, government has put up boards everywhere. They have put up signboards everywhere. One nation, one tax, one nation, one tax. One person called me and asked, Shiva sir, from this year onwards, I'll stop paying income tax because government has told GST is one nation, one tax. But let me tell you friends, just because GST law has come, you cannot afford to tell you will not pay income tax. GST law has only replaced certain indirect taxes. But GST law has not replaced direct taxes. Your direct tax like income tax is still in force. That is where that subject also in your syllabus, and it is still in force. Income tax is not covered in GST law. But of course, I do accept, I do admit that certain good number of indirect taxes have been subsumed in GST. There are some good number of indirect taxes which have been subsumed in GST and covered in GST law. Doesn't mean that income tax is also covered in GST law. We are going to discuss what are all covered in GST law very soon. We'll talk about it. First question. Before we move to what are all covered in that, first let's understand how GST has come into law and why GST has come into law. That's important. Because see, whenever we try to learn a concept or when I try to learn anything, it's utmost important to know why we are learning and how it has come. Prior to GST law, we had multiple taxes like excise duty, service tax, VAT, luxury tax, octroi, entry tax, and all these multiple taxes have brought in one shell known as GST. That is where they told one nation, one tax. Now I have a question. The big question I'll ask you is, friends, does GST apply to Jammu and Kashmir? Some of them will tell, sir, sounds little crazy because Jammu and Kashmir is a different state, altogether different, lot of issues are there, lot of problems are there. If you tell GST, again it becomes a new problem. But let me tell you, GST applies even to Jammu and Kashmir. So now, when we understand to what all states GST will apply, let me tell you very clearly, GST applies to whole of India. GST applies to whole of India, including Jammu and Kashmir. Now, big question is, what is covered in India? India is a country which is surrounded by three sides water. So people get their own definitions of India. But let me tell you, this word called India has been defined by GST law, where they told India covers territory. Territory means what? The structure of India or the land mass of India. So India covers territory and territorial waters, continental shelf and exclusive economic zone, soil under the water and airspace above territory and territorial waters. So let's elaborate this and understand this point. So friends, India covers what? Territory. Territory means what? Land. Next is what? Territorial waters. Friends, territorial water means from India, we draw one line called baseline. Baseline is a line where land is over and water starts. When I say water, I'm talking about the ocean or sea. Land, ocean or sea starts. Land is over, water starts. From that baseline up to 12 nautical miles. from the baseline up to 12 nautical miles, we call it as territorial waters. So that is also a part of India. And India also covers continental shelf or exclusive economic zone. Continental shelf or exclusive economic zone is basically from baseline up to 200 nautical miles. Baseline to 12 nautical miles we call it as territorial waters. Baseline to 12 nautical miles we call it as territorial waters. Baseline to 200 nautical miles we call it as continental shelf or exclusive economic zone. It is regarded as exclusive economic zone because exclusively only one activity is covered, that is extraction of mineral oil. Correct? So now what does India cover? Territory, territorial waters, continental shelf. Next, I also told India covers soil underwater. So inside water also if we do some activity, still it is subject to GST. Soil under water. And airspace. What space? Airspace. Airspace where? Airspace above territory and territorial waters. That is also a part of India. So friends, come on, let's recall once. What does India cover? India covers territory, territorial waters, continental shelf or exclusive economic zone, soil underwater, and airspace about territory and territorial waters. So this is all a part of India. So friends, what is GST full form? Goods and Services Tax. It extends to what? Whole of India. Does it cover Jammu and Kashmir also? Yes. GST law applies even to Jammu and Kashmir. Right, my dear friends? Now, an interesting point. What is the interesting point we have? Let's understand. Friends, we all are aware that GST law has come in 2017. But the idea of GST, the thought of GST arose almost 10 years back. Not now, almost 10 years back. Way back, there was one person known as Mr. Vijay Kelkar. He was basically one top economist, and this particular man has formed one committee known as Kelkar Task Force Committee. Central government has told this person called Kelkar to form a committee called Kelkar Task Force Committee to examine how would it be if we bring GST into India. How would it be if we bring GST into India? So basically, he was appointed to examine a kind of situation where how would the impact of economy be if we bring GST law into India, right? So after that, basically in 2010, the then Finance Minister, Mr. P. Chidambaram, has told that we are planning to bring GST into India. And it took some sweet time for GST to come. By the time the government has changed and BJP has come into power, and in 2014, Arun Jaitley declared and announced, Arun Jaitley, the finance minister at that time, has announced very clearly that India will see GST and GST will come to India, right? Now, in 2017, on 27th of March 2017, the GST bills were introduced in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and then they were passed on 29th of March. Then they became basically the act with effect from 1st of July 2017. They all came into force. Getting clarity, friends? Now, an interesting point to be observed. That, sir, is GST an invention of India or a discovery of India? Now, point is, when do we call something as invention or discovery? Invention is something like we are trying to find out or innovate a new thing. Discovery is something like whatever is already there, we just discovered. Correct? Thomas Alva Edison invented what? Electric bulb. Right? Alexander Graham Bell invented what? Phone. So basically these guys invented. And Columbus discovered what? America. It's already there. It's just discovered. But let me tell you, this GST law is not a new law. France was the first country to introduce GST way back in 1954. Way back in 1954, France was the first country to introduce GST law, right? And then It has been introduced for more than 160 countries. GST law has been introduced. And finally, in 2017, India adopted GST. Now you might ask one question. Sir, what is the interesting point about GST? Let me tell you, friends. Let's take an example. There is one company called Nokia. Nokia is in India. Nokia is manufacturing phones in India. When they manufacture a phone, earlier they were required to pay some duty called excise duty. Excise duty is a duty levied on manufacture or production of goods. So once they manufacture goods, they were paying excise duty, and once the goods are sold, they used to pay VAT, value added tax, or they used to pay something called CST, central sales tax. So on one transaction, because you manufactured, you paid excise duty, and again when you sold, you paid VAT or CST. So basically there is a multiplicity of tax which is happening. And under GST law, it's not like that. It's only one tax, known as what? GST. One nation, one tax. Understand, friends? So now, going back to my discussion where I told some time back that GST has been introduced in 2017, where the first country to introduce GST was France way back in 1954. India introduced in 2017. And the interesting point to be noted is that India has adopted one model known as dual GST model, which we have borrowed from a country known as Canada. From a country known as Canada, we have taken this model called dual GST model. What is dual GST model? We'll talk in detail soon. So now, let's move on to some more interesting discussion in the GST law. Friends, so before we go into more details as to what GST is all about, let's first understand the origin. As I told you already, the origin of GST about Kelkar Task Force Committee, and bills are presented in Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. Then the bills were passed. Prior to that, Chidambaram was in picture. After that, Arun Jaitley came in picture. This is all done. Fine. But we all know for any law to come to India, the prima facie, the supreme law is Constitution of India. Right? Now, an interesting point to be observed is, in the Constitution of India, under 7th schedule, in Constitution of India, under 7th schedule, in Constitution of India, under 7th schedule, there are 3 lists. List 1, List 2, List 3. So in Constitution, in 7th schedule to the Constitution, there are 3 lists. List 1, List 2, List 3. That is Union List, State List, Concurrent List. On the items which are covered in Union List, exclusive power to make the laws is with central government. And on the items covered in State List, state government has exclusive power. And on the items covered in Concurrent List, both central and state government has power. Are you understanding, friends? So which schedule, sir? 7th schedule to the Constitution of India has given 3 lists. List 1, List 2, List 3. List 1 is what list? Union List. This is what? State List. This is what? Concurrent List. In Union List items, who has power? Central government. State List items, state government. Concurrent List, both central and state government. Now, my dear friends, an interesting point. Prior to GST law, there were some items of taxes which were covered in Central List, which were covered in State List. But there was no item of tax which was covered in Concurrent List. That means what I am trying to tell you, prior to GST law, there were some taxes which were levied only by central government. And there were some taxes which are levied only by state government. But there were no items of tax which were levied by both central and state government. When I talk about this GST law, some time back I told you that India has not adopted France model, India has adopted Canada model, and we have a model called dual GST model. What does that mean? Friends, when we go to restaurant, let's say for a second, one person called Mr. A, he goes to one restaurant. One person called A, he goes to one restaurant, and after end of having the food, he will ask for the bill. Restaurant gave a bill of 1000 rupees along with the GST. Now tell me friends, GST what they will charge is, in the bill if you look at properly, you will find two GST, that is CGST and SGST, which is full form called as Central GST and State GST. Now imagine guys, if the rate of tax is let's say 5%, if the rate of tax is let's say 5%, they will charge CGST of 2.5%, SGST of 2.5%. So if rate of tax is 5%, they will charge CGST of 2.5%, SGST of 2.5%. It is not that 5%, 10%. Only one rate of tax is split into two components, CGST, SGST. So 5 became 2.5. If this is 18, it becomes 9. So that way, one rate of tax is split into two components. But in our level, in our syllabus, we don't have the concept of rates of GST. But we need to know what is dual GST model. That is why I explained that to you very clearly. That if the rate is 18, they will charge 9 and 9. Rate is 28, they will charge 14 and 14. Rate is 5%, they will charge 2.5. So one rate of tax is split into two components called CGST, SGST. Are we understanding friends? That is what is called as dual GST model. That is what India has adopted. So friends, as I told you already, India has adopted dual GST model. That is, on a transaction, both CGST as well as SGST, both are being imposed. So if let us say for a second, ShivaTeja is supplying goods to one person called RaviTeja at a value of 1 lakh rupees. So ShivaTeja is supplying goods to RaviTeja at a value of 1 lakh rupees and the GST rate is 18%. I am going to charge GST of 9% under CGST and 9% under SGST. That is what we are going to follow. Are we understanding, my dear friends? Right. Now, I will tell you one small interesting issue here. Now, what is that small interesting issue? As I told you already, in Constitution 7th schedule, there are 3 lists, that is Union list, State list, Concurrent list. Union list contains those points on which central government has power. State list contains those points on which state government has power. Concurrent list contains both central and state government. But let me tell you, there were no items of taxation in concurrent list prior to introduction of GST. That means before GST, there were some taxes which were levied by central government, some taxes which were levied by state government, but there is no tax where central and state together will levy, unlike GST. That is the reason why government had to amend Constitution of India and they passed one act called Constitution 101 Amendment Act. So far Constitution has been amended for various reasons. Constitution was amended in India, and 101th time the Constitution has been amended for the purpose of GST. And the amendment was required because we wanted to give power to both central and state together to impose a tax. Because always we had a concept where either central will impose tax or state will impose tax. So this is a reverse kind of equation where central and state together will impose tax. That is what is technically called as dual GST model. So whatever we are going to talk about GST has all been brought by Constitution 101 Amendment Act. So Constitution 101 Amendment Act deals all the points with related to the GST. Where the fundamental interesting point which we all should know, that is, as per Article 279A. What is article number, sir? 279A. They formed one council called GST Council. What is council name? GST Council. Any decisions, any matters, any changes related to the GST are taken by this GST Council only. And an interesting point. Who is there in this GST Council? Let me tell you. From central side, there are 2 people who are there. That is, number 1, Union's Finance Minister. Number 1, Union Finance Minister. Number 2, Minister of State for Finance. His title is Minister of State for Finance, but he is not a state level person, he is a central level person. So central side there are two persons called Union Finance Minister, Minister of State for Finance. And from all state, we have every state representative. And Union Finance Minister will act as the chairman for GST Council. Now what will happen? This GST Council will keep meeting, they will keep discussing what is the impact of GST, what's happening related to GST, and if required, they make any number of changes with relation to GST matter. But one interesting point which we need to observe, one important point which we need to figure out, that is, whenever this GST Council is meeting, law told to pass a resolution. Resolution means what? Decision. To pass a resolution, that means to make a decision conform, there should be a 3/4 majority. What majority? 3/4 majority. Indirectly, there should be a majority of 3/4 in order to pass resolution. But how interestingly they framed is something like this. As I told you some time back, central said there are two persons. No sir, these two members has a weight of 1/3. That means if these two tell yes, that means 33% is done. 33.33% is done. And all states together has a weight of 2/3. That is what? 66.67%. But let me tell you friends, let me reiterate the point what I told you some time back. That is, to pass a resolution, there should be a 3/4 majority. That means there should be a majority of 75%. If center says yes, only 33% is done. If states tell yes, only 66% is done. That means effectively they framed a percentage in such a manner that to pass any resolution, both center and state together should join the hands. Only when they together join the hands, resolution will be passed, because we want 3/4 majority to pass resolution. Center has only 1/3, state has only 2/3. So state alone cannot take any decision, center alone cannot take any decision. So center and state together should join the hands to pass a resolution, because resolution requires 75% majority, that is 3/4 majority. That's the story of our GST Council dealt by Article 279A